Record to cloud. Yep, that icon means it's recording.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, this is our episode 1 of our Advocacy 101 webinar series. And this one is If Not Us, Then Who? So as you can see, Titus and I are here together. That is me, Amy O'Leary, and I'm the director of the Early Education for All campaign. And we have Titus, our director of research and policy.
Hello, good afternoon.
And so for those of you who don't know, Strategies for Children and our signature Early Education for All campaign work to ensure that Massachusetts invests the resources needed for all children from birth through age 5 to access high quality early education programs that prepare them for success in school and life. And you can see the areas where we work in, policy development and monitoring, building constituency of folks who care about these issues, advocacy, research, and we don't do our own research, but we make research available to folks. We are tracking research that's available across the country, and also local context of the early education and care landscape in local communities as well as the state. Communications and outreach, so we have our e-advocacy tool, so when we send out an email, folks can click a link to contact their elected officials. We also have our blog, Eye on Early Education. So we would encourage you to subscribe to both our email list and to our blog, and we will send that information in our follow-up email. And the last bucket that we think about is implementation. So as we think about policies that are being developed for young children and families, what does it look like as far as implementation? So we are a nonprofit 501c3, and Titus and I are the employees right now, and we raise money to stay in business. So we are very grateful to our funders for the support to do this work. So we are going to launch the poll to get things started. So you're going to think about these questions and whether you can imagine yourself doing them. Would you go down to City Hall to complain about a tax bill that you thought was too high? Would you help when a neighbor gets a confusing letter from Social Security by making phone calls and dealing with the bureaucracy? Would you make a presentation at a local community group about a project or a topic that you care about and know well? And finally, would you testify before a state legislative committee as part of a panel on a subject that you know well and care about? So Titus is going to take launch the poll now, and we'll look forward to your responses. And if you're with a group listening, talk about it within your group and see where people would use their skills. Okay, we see some votes coming in.
All right, it looks like half of you have voted. Thank you. Let's go 5 more seconds on the voting. And this is multiple choice, so feel free to click all that apply to you. All right. A couple more seconds. And I'm going to close the poll. Last call. All right, thank you so much. I have ended the polling, and you should see the results now. So looks like the third option there was the most popular.
And this tracks very closely to what we see when we are out doing these Advocacy 101 sessions across the state and across the country. So the first one about going down to City Hall to complain about a tax bill. Some of the feedback we hear from that is if you would not do it, you wouldn't go to City Hall because you're not sure where you should go. You're not sure whether you would know exactly what the tax bill should be. We often talk about there is a saying that says you cannot fight City Hall. And just the time that it's open, you would have to take time off of work, go down, stand in line to get the information. We also know that sometimes the word complain discourages people to pick this option. That maybe if it said, would you go down to City Hall to get more information about a tax bill, you might be more likely to do this. When we hear from people who would do this, they say, I'm paying taxes. I want to know what the accurate amount I should be paying for. If my bill went up dramatically, I would want to know what's going on. So that's pretty common response that we hear from people across for this question. Now, it's always ironic when we see the second answer, because more people would help a neighbor than go advocate for money that they should think that they should be getting. But we often see this polling pretty high, that most people want to help their neighbor. We think the mode makes a difference. So you're on the phone, you don't have to go anywhere. And people think that if they have some expertise or some knowledge that they can help share with someone else, they're more likely to do this. When we hear about people who wouldn't do this, we hear about things like, what if I hear confidential information about my neighbor? It's really none of my business. I don't want to be on the call pressing 1, 2, 3, and 4. And maybe I don't know enough to help my neighbor. Well, now this is great to see that 100% of people would do a presentation at a community group that you know about, something that you know well and that you care a lot about. And we would hope to see that most people do this. Some barriers would be public speaking. Some people just are not feeling comfortable in that area, as well as kind of the logistics, that if I have to plan the meeting, get ready for the presentation, go, and what if nobody shows up? And now the last item about testifying before a state legislative committee as part of a panel, same thing, and a subject that you know well and care about. We do usually see a bit more hesitancy, and we think it's about where you would go. So going to a community group might feel more comfortable than going to the State House to be part of testifying for a legislative committee. But we also know, back to the title of our episode today about if not you, then who? If we are not the ones that are willing to go to use our voice and be the experts for elected officials, who else can we depend on to help share those messages? So as we move to the next slide, when we think about advocacy, we wonder what people think about. And advocacy, as you saw in the poll before, can take many different forms. You can advocate for yourself, which is really what we saw about going down to City Hall. You can help advocate for other people, where we saw about helping the neighbor. You can advocate around raising awareness and sharing information with larger groups of people, which would be the community group. And then you can directly advocate to legislators and policymakers who may be making decisions on areas that you care about. We also think about advocacy as it can be writing a letter to the editor. It can be joining a march or a protest. It can be doing a presentation about an issue that you care about and asking people to take action. It can also be just talking to your Uber driver about, about early education and care, or it can be about anytime you go to a meeting about a topic that you're thinking about, how does it connect back to early education and care? So advocacy, sometimes people have a narrow view of it, but we want to make sure that people feel empowered to think about advocacy in the big picture. Advocacy does not just mean going to the State House and to fight for something that you believe in. We need all of these different pieces of being an advocate, and we need each of you to think about where you feel most comfortable. You don't have to be the person standing in front of the State House with a megaphone to be an advocate. And you also don't have to be the person talking at the podium. We need people behind the scenes helping to share information, get feedback, and really talk about what the policy changes and what the impact is into classrooms across the Commonwealth and to family child care provider homes. If there's something that happens in the state budget or a bill passes, we need to know what the result of that is. And you are the best to handle that advocacy. So one of the reasons we wanted to start this series was to think about Advocacy Day at the State House. And we want to make clear that you do not have to come to Boston on that day to be part of Advocacy Day. We wanted to start the series with kind of a 101 about who represents you, because that's an important part to think about as we take next steps for Advocacy Day. But through the webinar series, we want to figure out ways that you can participate no matter where you are, and how you can help raise awareness about these important issues. We know that our advocacy cannot start and end on March 5th. We are going to need a continued presence both in the districts and at the State House to make sure that people know that we care about these issues. So this is just to say, get ready for this day. You can see it starts in the morning, and as we get closer to the day, we will have more information. And Strategies for Children is joining with many other groups in Commonwealth for this day to come together to fight for young children and families. So one of the things we need to consider is who are the key decision makers that impact early education and a child's development. And we know that yes, people in government have decision-making power, but we also need to think about parents, about principals, about directors, about social workers, about home visitors, about licensors, about folks who develop the curriculum, about folks who develop assessment, about the people who define what quality is, the people who are designing the materials for classrooms, the people who are designing facilities for programs. Where are young children and families? So sometimes we only think about people who are changing policy or making rules, but we know there are so many different people that can impact a child's early development. And so when we think about all of those people, we need to think about what strategies are we going to use to help send our message. The message that we send to somebody who might be developing assessment might be different than a parent who's trying to choose an early education program for their toddler. So we need to think about what messages will resonate with different groups and how we can be effective in delivering those messages. So first is knowing the process. We need to understand the different branches of government and the timeline about when legislation is happening, the budget process, and elections. You need to be sure you know who to contact about what, about where there are decisions getting made, and also when. When is the best time to connect with people? You want to be aware of other hot topics that may be getting more attention and figure out how to connect to them or not. And we'll talk about that in terms of opportunities that we have in Massachusetts right now. And you want to connect with groups and organizations who do this work in your state and in your community. We know that people who are working every day with young children and families it's hard sometimes to get out and think about what else you can be doing to help advocate. So we want to make it as easy as possible for you to use your limited time to be effective advocates. And most importantly, we cannot be intimidated by the process. Some have said in general that sometimes these systems are set up to keep people out rather than encourage them to come in. But we know how powerful the content and information that you have and how critical it is that we share that with people who are making decisions every day. So today we're going to quickly go through who our elected officials are. And this may seem like repeat information for some folks. It could be new information for other folks. Please don't try to figure out on your own. After the webinar, both Titus and I are available to help you figure out the information. So the first thing in Massachusetts to know is that it's very easy to go to one place to figure out who your elected officials are. So this website, wheredoivote.ma.com, is a resource that you should use. Your homework after this webinar is to make sure that you and everyone that you work with knows who represents them at different areas of government. So you'll go to that website, and this is what you will see. And you will go to, you will fill in this form, and you can see how detailed the information needs to be. So you enter your street number, the street name, whether it's a road, a street, a terrace, or a boulevard, your city and town, and then your zip code. And the most important thing to remember is your elected officials are connected to your home address. Even if you live in the same community, you may or may not have the same elected officials. In some cases, your neighbors across the street will have different elected officials. So while you may see trends with people who live close to you and in your neighborhood, you really need to make sure that you are aware of who represents you. And you can see that this is, I've typed in my information, and so this is what how the form came back for me. So the top boxes that says statewide office holders for the Commonwealth, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary, auditor, treasurer, attorney general, and our 2 U.S. senators. Those people represent everybody in Massachusetts. So it doesn't matter if you live in Pittsfield or Springfield or Cape Cod, Lawrence, Lowell, or New Bedford. These people are the statewide office holders for the Commonwealth. And then you can see the next set of boxes says district representatives. So for me, my U.S. rep is Joe Kennedy. My state senator is Senator Cynthia Stone Cream. And my state representative is Tommy Vitolo. And that is specific to my home address. So Titus, who lives in New Bedford, he would have the same people at the top: the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary, auditor, treasurer, attorney general, and U.S. senator. But he would have different representatives for the congressional, the state senate, and the state rep. So as you think about this and encourage other people to find out their information, you can just print this sheet from the website, which is the easiest thing to do. So your homework from this webinar is to understand who these people are and who you need to contact about what. We're going to get into that right now. So this is a picture of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And as we said, in Massachusetts, U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren and U.S. Senator Ed Markey represent the entire state of Massachusetts in Washington, D.C. And then you have one U.S. representative based on your home address. And that means that the state of Massachusetts is divided up into 9 sections. And here are our U.S. representatives who represent Massachusetts in Washington, D.C. One thing to keep in mind when we think about the census, which is happening in 2020, is in 2010, we lost a U.S. rep seat. So in Massachusetts, we used to have 10 U.S. reps, and now we have 9. And that's one measure to show how critical it is to make sure that everybody is counted for the census, because U.S. representatives are based on your population of your state. So we want to make sure that we at least keep the 9, and we'll have to see how the population spreads across the country to see how those 435 seats are broken down. So again, everybody has Senator Warren and Senator Markey, and then each of you, based on your home address, have one of these 9s representing you in Washington, D.C. And then we think about the State House in Massachusetts, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts. And we are rare as a state where the center of our business and media is also our state capital. And we know that if you're living in Pittsfield or Williamstown or Worcester, that the State House can not be as easy to get to if you're living closer to Boston. Many of our elected officials at the state level have offices in their hometowns or their districts. So you do not need to come all the way to the State House to connect with your elected officials. As we go back to kind of 8th grade civics, there are different branches of government. And this is the Baker administration is the executive branch. So you can see we have a picture of Governor Baker and a picture of Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito. We do not have a governor's mansion in Massachusetts. Many states, because you can't drive from one end to the other, have moved have the governor living in the state capital. Our governor lives in his home residence as well as our lieutenant governor. So we know that the governor and lieutenant governor have to go to Stop and Shop. They have to go to get gas. They might be at CVS. So it's important to know what they look like. So if you see them, you can introduce yourself and ask them if you have anything you want to talk to them about early education, or just say hello. And this is what early education looks like education looks like. You can see Governor Baker, and then we have Secretary Jim Pizer. And then in Massachusetts, we have 3 state agencies focused on education: the Department of Early Education and Care, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the Department of Higher Education. And it's important to know that there are 3 different agencies that have 3 different sets of responsibilities. So again, you know who to talk to about what. And in our next slide, you can see we also have photos of these people because the same reason. If you see the commissioner, Commissioner Sam, please make sure you introduce yourself. You can see the photos of the secretary, and then Undersecretary Ann Reale, who was the first commissioner in Massachusetts of the Department of Early Education and Care, Commissioner Agnew Treworgy, Commissioner Riley, and then Commissioner Carlos Santiago. So it's important to, and their information, you can, if you want to talk with them, you can send them letters, you can attend meetings where they're attending. Each of the departments has a board, and then each of the boards appoint the commissioner. So we know that the Department of Early Education and Care has a monthly board meeting, and they make time available for public comments. Each of these boards do that. So even if you can't attend in person, you can write a letter or share testimony about something that you think is important. The agendas are posted on the website. We'll include some of this information in the follow-up. But sometimes people think, like, what would I have to offer? We know that people who are working every day with children and families need to be part of the decision-making process and helping to inform decisions that are being made. So if there's going to be a discussion about quality and what quality looks like, we need to make sure that educators are part of that conversation. What it looks like in a family child care home, what it looks like in a toddler classroom, working with infants, or a preschool classroom. So while I know that you all have full-time jobs and are working very hard, we want to make sure that you understand that there are opportunities for you to weigh in and have your voice heard different parts of the process. Now we're going to move to the state legislature. So remember, in Washington, D.C., we have the 2 U.S. senators and you have 1 U.S. rep. In our Massachusetts legislature, and these people live in Massachusetts and they work in Massachusetts, they go to the state houses where they meet. For those cases, we have 40 state senators and 160 representatives. So that means for every geographic area that we have a state senator in, we have about 5 state representatives that represent different parts of that area. Now, if you take a city like Boston or Springfield, there are multiple state representatives that cover those communities. So that's why it's so critical that you make sure that you know who represents you and your home. And then again, you can use the form about wheredoivote.ma.com. And when you look at that form, you can see that their names are hyperlinked. So you can click on each one of those people and see their bio, see their photo, see what committees they are part of, and you can see the district that they represent. So the maps will show you what part of Massachusetts they represent. So you can see what other colleagues or friends or what other areas your legislators are focused on. All right, we did have a question about
Advocacy Day flyers.
yes, so we will be sharing an Advocacy Day flyer that folks can share with the networks. So thank you, Kate. Okay, I know we're giving you a lot of information at one time, but we want to give you a big overview, and then in follow-up sessions, we will go deeper into each of these sections. So remember, in Massachusetts, we have 40 state senators and 160 state representatives. And you can see the leaders of those chambers here. So the Speaker of the House, Robert DeLeo, who lives in Winthrop. And then you talked about, then we see the Senate President, Karen Spilka. Again, we have their communities where they live, in case you live in one of those communities. And we'll get in deeper as we get closer to Advocacy Day about the structure of the legislature and the committees, but right now to know that each of these people are the leaders of their chambers. Okay, so the timeline is important to think about in Massachusetts. We have a 2-year legislative cycle and a yearly budget cycle. So you can see our legislative session starts in January of 2019. So in November of 2018, people were elected. On January 2nd, the legislators get sworn in. And on January 3rd, the governor gets sworn in. By January 18th, all of the bills that are going to be considered have to be filed by January 18th. And we have a 1.5 to 2 years for those bills to be passed. There are about 5,000 bills filed at the State House every year. Each one of those bills gets assigned to a committee. Each one of those bills has a public hearing. And everybody is advocating on behalf of their bills to make sure they get passed. So that's the legislative track. And we'll talk in another episode about what a bill looks like and what ideas are best suited for a bill. The other track is the state budget process. So you can see here that last year, the governor released his budget proposal on January 23rd. Then we had the legislative leaders were announced. In April, the House, the 160 state representatives, filed their budget recommendation. In May, the Senate files their budget recommendations. In June, 3 state reps and 3 state senators come together to come to agreement on one budget from the legislature. They send it to the governor for approval, and then the budget year starts. And then the same thing happens the next year. And what we want to talk about is this budget. So we are planning right now for fiscal year 2021. And as you can see, last week, Governor Baker filed his budget recommendation. And all that means is the state has a certain amount of money. It's about $44 billion. The governor puts his proposal out about how we should spend those $44 billion. And just like you in your personal budget, there are areas where the state has to pay first. So often we think of our personal budgets where you have to pay the rent and mortgage first. You have to pay your car insurance. You have to pay your health insurance. The state has certain obligations that they have to pay. We also know sometimes when you have money left over, you can buy things that might be more luxurious, or you can plan for vacation, or other things that you're saving for, and the state has the same situation. If there's additional money, once they get past what they have to pay, that's where there's areas for increased spending in certain areas. We also know that if we have the same total of money, if we want to spend more money, we either have to get more revenue, which might mean more taxes or more savings, or we would have to cut expenses. So you would have to cut things that you're already paying for. The state has to do the same thing. And then you can see, so after the governor files the governor's budget, then we have the same process. The House, the Senate, the 3 and 3 get together, and then we have the budget that starts. This year, because it's the second year, the legislative session ends on July 31st. And then we have an election day on November 3rd. So that's kind of the highlight of the process. We are going to now focus on the state budget in general. And this is a graph from our good friends at the Mass Budget and Policy Center, where you can see the trends since 2001, fiscal year 2001, of the big areas of the state budget. So you can see that in most cases, healthcare is a very large percentage of our budget. And you can see the lime green is education, which would include early ed, K-12, and higher education. You can see environment at the very top of many of the bars, and you can see the other areas of government. And this just gives you a good sense that while things have gone up and down, it's been pretty proportional to the amounts that have been spent. And Titus would like to add.
Sure, and this figure is adjusted for inflation. So sometimes we give the raw numbers, and that can be helpful too. And in this case, and with every resource Mass Budget does, they try to adjust for inflation so that you can actually make apples to apples comparisons from, say, 2000 up until today.
And we like to use this slide because it really just shows the proportion of the money is pretty much going to the same places. We have not seen very big increases or decreases in the way that we have been spending money in the Commonwealth. So now, if we think a little bit about the governor's budget that was released last week, and remember, this is his proposal. Nothing is final until everybody agrees in July. The governor proposed increased investments, and this was the 8th consecutive year of increases. And we have a full page of information on our website, which you can see the link at the bottom, and we will send in the follow-up email. But the areas where we saw increases included the child care access. So we have funding that supports supportive families and TANF, which is a temporary aid to needy families, at $350.9 million, and the income eligible line item, which at $286.7 million. These are the two largest line items that fund the Department of Early Education and Care. And we also know that many of these funds come from the federal government to the state to be allocated out in supports for families. We also saw the governor include a rate increase for early educators' salaries, so he included $10 million. And this is one of the first times he has included it in his original budget. We saw a new sliding fee scale reserve to help reduce parent fees for subsidized childcare at $10 million. And this is a new line item, and there is language to describe how this money should be used.
There are also increases in the governor's budget for quality improvement, EEC administration, and the Workforce Development Career Pathways Grant. We just did not fit them on the slide, but if you go to the state budget portion of our webpage below, you can see a full listing of line items.
And again, the intention of this is not to make everybody an expert overnight in the state budget process, but it really is about where you can go to find the information. We saw level funding, which means no increases for the Commonwealth Children's Partnership Initiative and for Head Start. And again, we can answer specific questions that you have around these. This is a chart that Titus has developed to show the funding trends for the Department of Early Education and Care since fiscal year 09. And you can see that it represents the recession. And most of government would look like this, as when the recession hit, we know that many areas of government had to cut back. What we want to point out here is how long it has taken us to get above that fiscal year 2009 level.
And this, unlike the bar chart earlier from Mass Budget, this chart is not adjusted for inflation. So if we adjusted it, it would probably look a little flatter. But we wanted to show the actual dollar amounts that were appropriated each fiscal year.
So the legislature passes the budget. There's language that says how the department needs to spend this money, and then the department has to get the money out to programs across the Commonwealth. We include this slide just as a reminder, as we know there has been much attention and awareness raised around early educator salaries but we know that we still have a long way to go. This chart shows the Massachusetts median annual workforce earnings, and the data is a little dated. It's from 2015, but we know that it hasn't dramatically increased. We know that the rate reserve has gone to really try to address some of these issues, but we also know that there are many more educators who would not benefit from a rate reserve or a rate increase just because there aren't only 8% of preschoolers have a subsidy. Or that was our last count. It may have changed. But we know that overall the workforce, we need some workforce strategies that help support educators that work with infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school age. So we know that this is this chart has helped to really highlight this issue. And the red line that you see going across are the eligibility for the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which did receive, people understood that we are asking educators to help serve other children, and their families are struggling with the income that we are giving them.
Oh, sorry.
So the headline is, why does this matter? So we know that you can make a difference. We know that people together can change policies and laws. It happens every session. We know that advocacy is easy, and we know that policymakers need your expertise. Anytime we talk to elected officials, while they love hearing from me and Titus, they love it even more hearing from people who are doing the work. And we will talk as we continue the series about other opportunities for you to be able to stay in a classroom or to stay in your program and continue to build your voice with elected officials. But as we said, the first most important step is to understand who represents you. So completing the form on wheredoivote.ma.com is the first step in doing that, and then learning about your elected officials. Check out their biographies, look about the other places where they represent, see what committees they are on. We have an education committee, which has members from all across the state and the Commonwealth. Make sure that you are paying attention to the agenda items about what is happening at the Department of Early Education and Care. And please, please follow up with us and ask us how we can be helpful to you as you investigate and figure out how you can use your voice. One more thing we would like to highlight is on our blog, we have been featuring the stories of early educators in our Voices from the Field series. So we are working to highlight an early educator, family child care provider, school age counselor in their work around early education. We have 5 questions that we ask. We post a photo and the responses to those questions. And we want to make sure that there is at least one story from every educator across the state. So we are now going to look at the Q&A box, and we just had a question about the election in 2020. So the election of in 2020 in November.
Yeah, so the question here is, when will there be an election of House of Reps and state senators? In Massachusetts, all of our 200 state legislators are up for re-election every 2 years. And so they will all be up for re-election on the November ballot.
Along with the president?
Correct. And there will be a Senate race as well.
Yes, a U.S. Senate. We'll put the schedule on who gets elected when in our follow-up email, but that's a great question.
And we didn't mention local elections, but
right.
You know, the municipal elections, I believe, are on the odd numbered years. So it's 2020, that's an even year. So for most of you, there will not be local elections. There will be these state and national elections in 2020. A great question from Kiana about inflation and comparing 2009 levels of funding to current day. I actually don't know the answer to that. So I'm going to go to massbudget.org and look at the budget calculators at Mass Budget to see how we compare adjusting for inflation. But yes, thank you for your question. And that is important to do when you're comparing back, specifically if you're going back multiple years, you know, not 1 or 2, 3 years, but going back 5, 10 years, you really should adjust the numbers, and we'll take that into consideration for our future charts.
And Kiana, you also asked about being a grad student. And yes, I teach at BU, I teach undergrads, and I teach at Quinsigamond Community College in Worcester, and teach people who are in the fields getting their BA and master's degree. And yes, we need the student voice to be part of this conversation. As a student, you are impacted by the decisions that are happening in higher education. And then you're thinking about what you're going to do as you graduate and move on into the classrooms or programs or advocacy jobs across wherever you choose to be. So we believe that every voice matters in advocacy, and your expertise, whether it be a student, whether it be a newer educator or someone who's been in the field for a long time, it all matters. And that would be our headline for this, that if it's not us, who else is going to do the work that we need to do to make sure that the children and families that we serve have high quality programs, that educators have resources and salary, but also as well in their materials for their programs, and that we really think about how we can work together to help raise awareness and get the impact that we want for young children and families. So here it is, Melora has a question, and Judy. So Judy reminds us to attend your local caucus, and that happens in your local community, so we can make sure we get the information out about that. Thank you, Judy. We also know that we've seen early educators run for office at the state and local level, especially school committee, especially any place, you know, library boards, zoning boards, wherever you can take the opportunity to run for office. And if you were to run into the governor, we would first have you introduce yourself. You should thank him for his budget that he proposed. And then you should talk about the importance of, while this is a good step forward, we have ways to go into a field that has been undervalued and under-resourced for a long time. So that while these increases are significant and important to keep in mind, we still have a long way to go when we are thinking about early education. I would also add that we have not really, as a state, invested seriously in early education as we have in other areas of education. We know that our third grade reading scores have persistently been stagnant. So we know that this intervention of investing in young children can pay dividends in the future for not just the early education agenda, but our larger education in the Commonwealth. So that might be a place. And Kate, yes, we are going to send you the link to the budget page at mass.gov, where they have done a great job breaking down the information between the 3 different education agencies. So you'll see pie charts and kind of all of the line items. And again, it's for information purposes. Don't feel that you have to know every single part of the budget, but you will see general trends and information. So thank you for those follow-up questions. And we really appreciate, we had over 100 people RSVP for this webinar. We were thrilled to see the response, and we look forward to continuing the series over the next few months. Thank you so much for your advocacy and for your attention today. Take care.